So I think in playing around with AI, which I have very mixed feelings about overall, I typed in write about a dad renting a bouncy house castle for his daughter's birthday party in the style of a Raymond Chandler novel.
Wow. Wow.
And it goes, the sun was beating down on the city like a hammer on an anvil. Sweat dripped from my forehead, and I could feel my shirt sticking to my back. It was my little girl's birthday, and I was determined to make it special, even if it meant trekking across town in this heat.
I love it. My name is Jeff Irving, and this is the Vrahode Tavern Podcast. I am the creator of the Vrahode Game System. And in this podcast, I'm going to do a deep dive into the lore and gameplay of Vrahode. I'm joined by Brandon Rollins, who will be acting as your stand-in, asking many of the questions you might be curious about yourself. Brandon, what is our topic today?
Well, there's only one thing on my mind today. I want to fight.
Okay, let me get my wife. Kristen, Brandon wants to fight today. Nothing. You're going to have to fight with me, Brandon. I'm sorry.
Whoa. 2v1? No.
2v1. It's going to happen.
No. 2v1. That's not fair.
Well, it's going to happen in Vrahode, so you better get prepared.
Oh, boy. Yeah, so that's actually what I wanted to talk about, because we've been getting, well, honestly, we've been getting a lot of engagement lately on the Vrahode Tavern Facebook group, which is always awesome to see, especially since there are long gaps in when we record. There is a very meaningful difference in the amount of what we're seeing between this and the last episode. But because folks are starting to chat now, we're starting to get kind of the questions that people are interested in. And one thing that just keeps coming up is combat. How does combat work in this game? How does combat work in this game series?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, combat's that's a really big subject. We'll probably break that off into multiple episodes. But I would like to just start with a few high-level questions and then start getting into specific examples from there.
Yeah, sounds good.
So here's what I'm thinking. First question. What are your goals in designing the combat system the way that you are trying to? Is the intent to make something that's really difficult? Is the intent to make something that lets people kind of adventure along and have fun and not worry too much about death or injury? What's the ultimate goal with the system?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of a high challenge level, but I am not a big fan of rules. So I think what we're trying for here, and it goes along with everything else we're trying to do in the series and in the game system, the Vrahode game system, is I kind of think of our modes of play and kind of every aspect of the game to kind of be a pretty shallow rabbit hole of rules. Pretty accessible. Let's try to keep things from getting too complex or cryptic. Let's try to keep them out of books. Where they're every couple steps you take in some games, you've got to refer to the rule book, because it's not intuitive. It's not obvious on its face what's going on, and so we're trying to avoid that for sure. But I love a high challenge level. I think a lot of games, especially lately, you've got a lot of options for risk mitigation, and it's like, if you want to risk more dice, to do more damage, you can. And then when you try to do anything, it's always this give and take of risk, and it almost seems like too easy. So I think, keeping it straightforward and obvious how combat is supposed to work, keeping the rules as simple as we can, staying away from complex iconography, and making it as fast, as consequential, and as fun as possible, at the cost, I would say, of some realism, some tactical detail, and things like that.
So what you're going for, it sounds like, is tough but straightforward.
Yeah, challenging but not over complex.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so I understand that there's games where you do truly talk about all the details, like so-and-so takes one step back, they draw their sword, from their Well, what actually do you call the thing that holds a sword from their
Scabbard.
scabbard? Yeah,
Mhm.
they draw their sword from their scabbard, and that's like a separate action. I know that's out there. And it sounds like, based on what you've told me in the past, as well as now, that you're okay with just letting the basic administrative details of combat slide to keep people engaged in the actual fighting itself.
I think that's fair. I mean, I I think if you're gonna have multiple attacks, you can't just chuck a handful of dice and make that resolve in any meaningful way. If you let's say you're doing 3 attacks on somebody. Well, however you're gonna do that, whatever die choices you're using to roll those attacks, I think, to keep things clear, you have to have those rolls be separated, so that the first attack you did of the 3 was a hit, second was a miss, third was a miss, things like that. And so there's a certain amount. I mean, you got a certain amount of dice chucking involved whenever combat's involved. It's just, or you could do like Jamie Jolly did, where you've got the choices between dice and cards, and that's a different approach. I like luck. I don't mind a certain amount of luck in combat, because to me, the unpredictability of combat is best served by luck. You know, because
Yeah,
things.
you know what's interesting? I've got a kind of a left field example of a game that does that I like. It's not actually a board game; it's a video game. It was XCOM,
Mhm.
just the letter XCOM on Xbox, not terribly long ago. By which I mean probably a decade, honestly. And one of the things I really liked about it is that when you went to attack the aliens, who are the bad guys here, it would always give you a percentage chance of it succeeding or failing, and you knew what it was going to be before you actually committed.
Oh, cool.
And
Yeah,
to me I was like, okay, so this tells me what the actual possibilities are here, and I can decide to myself, it's like, is it worth pushing my luck and taking that 45% chance?
yeah.
And because it was positioned that way to me, I felt like I had control, even though there was the element of luck. I was able to make an informed decision and let the game play out the way it was going to play out from there, which I always thought was cool.
It
I'm
is
not
cool.
anti luck either. I'm anti arbitrary stuff happening, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone playing an adventure game where they have a character, because obviously when you have a character, you begin to kind of get invested in that character and in their advancement. And so you don't want to feel like you're getting beaten up on, or someone is using math unnecessarily to punish you, you know. And I definitely don't think we're doing that. I feel like, well, I just did a blog post about combat. Oh, I don't know, what was it, a week ago or so?
Yeah, which will be probably about 4 weeks ago as of the time that this drops. But yeah, and that was actually a really good overview for people who want to see that in the written form, because that explains a lot of details about a specific example of battle.
Yeah, I just had so much fun. I've got to say, I had so much fun doing that. I wasn't upstairs where I had a lot of room. I was down here
Hmm.
with my stuff spread out all over the desk, and Kristen was down here doing her thing. And I was every time it would be time for initiative, I would go over to her and make her draw out the initiative tokens. So that I didn't have any. I know I wanted to make sure everything was random with
Hmm.
the way the initiative order came up. But it was so fun, because when I started the battle, I just knew in my mind that these 3 heroes against these 2 enemies, that the heroes were just going to get wiped. I mean, I just had this bad feeling about it. And it kind of started to go that way. But then I really decided that, hey, I'm going to really make decisions for all of these heroes like I would if I was playing each one.
And they
And
managed to pull it out at the 11th hour with some
oh,
very, 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 very thin margins.
yeah, and it just, and I mean, in our game series, I mean, you've always got the ability to run, and I say always. I'm going to say that in quotes, because there are situations where we don't let you run, but for a reason. But yeah, I mean, it's fun, fast. We didn't really. I wasn't able in the blog post because I didn't want it to get overly long, the writing of it, because blog posts, as somebody told me, I think it might have been you know, 500 to 1,000 words or so is about, the type of chunk that people want to read.
For the type of thing that we're doing, I would say that's right.
Yeah, so I didn't wanna get too long with it, so we didn't deal with a couple important issues of combat, and we can do that today, so that's kinda cool.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of talk through an example of battle as well because
Yeah,
partly because I think that some people will just understand it better hearing it. It's just the way some folks work.
I
But
do.
also, yeah, and honestly, I'm not like that. I'm much more visual um to be honest, I actually have a tough time following audiobooks, but nevertheless, a lot of people will like the audio format of it. But also, I just want to ask questions because there's a lot of stuff where I think there's actually opportunity to like kind of explain what some of these things are and why they're happening the way they are that isn't necessarily true in a blog post.
Yeah.
So I think another like really big basic question here to me is how often do you fight in Vrahode?
Um, well, it's an adventure game slash dungeon crawl, so we've got a lot of different modes of play, and I would say that probably the least often mode that you would run into a fight, into combat, would be probably in ocean travel. You're on a fast ship, and the way the mechanics work for whether you run into an enemy or not have a pretty favorable equation math wise for the frequency of that happening. Now, the severity of a fight when you do encounter an enemy at sea is usually pretty bleak because what we've done is there's scaling mechanisms in all modes of play in the Vrahode game system. The way we scale the battles for ocean travel is you only have to draw a card for the entire ship for every other region you enter. So you're moving at a clip, pretty good clip. You're sailing along, and your trips are fairly short to get from the main island of Rendur. Let's say you're going over to Duara, and it's 5 regions away. Well, you're only going to draw a couple cards for that distance, to get the ship from coast to coast. So the chances of you running into something are pretty low. But if you do, then that creature is yeah, that creature, whatever it is in most cases scaled to a full 6 hero or 6 player complement of players. And the way we scale that is with the ship's crew. If you're playing the game solo and you're going from Rendur to Duara or from Rendur over to Prahar, in order to make that a salvageable fight and keep the ship from sinking is we've got to have that ship's crew fill out that complement of 6. So if you're playing solo, it's you and 5 crewmates of the Lady Virtue ship that you're on against whatever is in the water. But let's say we're talking about the average in overland. We've got, 6 biomes essentially. We've got mountains and plains and all, 6 of these different types of terrain types. The math of whether you're going to run into a fight is different for each one. So if I'm in an icy tundra area or I'm in a desert area, those are harsh climates with much lower population of enemies, and it's also much less rewarding for you because there's less enemies and adventurers there. You're not going to find items laying around either. So we've used a real kind of logical rationale as to where the concentration of items in the world would be found and where enemies would be found based on the common rationale in the world, which is access to fresh water, access to game, and resources that creatures and enemies need, just like we do, to survive. So forests are an increased chance of finding enemies for sure. Along rivers, marshes, coasts, you're going to run into stuff because there's prey there, there's water there. And so we've just kind of applied that. So I would say in the overland regions, the most dangerous and the most rewarding to enter are probably forests. And along rivers and marshes and coastlines are similar.
So
Uh,
that's interesting because you have the ability to choose which biomes you prefer to enter. Well, to a limited extent. I mean, obviously you have to get from point A to point B, but it means that you know more or less what you're getting into. you
You
know
do. And
what places are going to have all the bad guys.
well, and in many cases, not many, I should say some. In some cases, if you're traveling overland and the region that you're getting ready to enter has both forests and plains, for example, your party can choose, or if you're playing solo, you can choose whether to traverse that region. You're going to go through the plains or the forest to get through it. And so then you're going to, when you draw from the overland exploration deck, you're going to read the text from the biome that you chose to travel through. And so in a way, you get control of your own math.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then also, you're talking about the overlands, but there's also the underlands, which I understand are quite a bit more dangerous than the overlands or the oceans.
Well, they are, and I think necessarily so. I think the underlands are kind of, they really make you think. You have to be strategic to survive them. Overland travel has varying degrees of danger, and of course, again, there's multiple scaling mechanisms going on in the underlands. Like, for example, if you, me, and Kristen, if we're playing and we go into um, an overland region, let's say it's forest, we each have to draw a card and we put it face down next to us. And we're not sure what that card's going to represent for us. Um, but that's a scaling mechanism because there's a chance of safe travel on those three cards. There's a chance for an item. We could find an item in our travels there, or there could be an enemy there. And so all of these all of these decks have different equations, and then all of the biomes have adjusted math as well to compensate. But again, underlands, that is, those cards we draw in the overlands are for that entire region. Well, when we go into an underland encounter map, each of the rooms and halls that we have to get through, not the halls, but the rooms are, well, yeah, no, the halls too, are are cards that have to be drawn. And so it's like traveling through all these little mini regions with unique flavor text and dangers, traps, enemies, all concentrated in these little areas. And so yeah, it's diabolical.
Yeah, but of course, the Underlands are a great place to get all the sweet loot too. So if you're in it for the gear grind, you can go there, and it makes it worth fighting all those bad guys.
Oh yeah. And I got a little caught up in talking about those cards in the overlands, and I want to go back to that eventually. But yes, in the underlands, there are things available there that just flat aren't available in the overlands. There's extreme rewards and riches that are they're just not laying around on the surface.
Yeah. So I'm thinking really high level, walk me through how a battle starts and just roughly what things happen during that battle.
Okay. Well, let's go back to the scenario with you, me, and Kristen. We're playing, and let's take a real basic look at what happens. We're traveling, and each round, when we're in the overland map, that's the top level view, satellite view of our world, right? We're moving from one land region to another. And let's just, for whatever purposes, let's say we're on Rendur, that's the main landmass. And let's say we're in a region and we're traveling from one to another. So we're going to we're going to exit the region we're in, enter the new one. Okay, because there's three of us, one of the scaling mechanisms is that each hero is responsible for drawing a card from the overland exploration deck. And we're going to place it face down next to us. Okay, and because there's three of us, we're also generating more noise, and we're putting off odor, right? Every living thing has a scent, right? We're putting off odor. So what that translates into mechanically in the world of Vrahode is threat. We're increasing the threat of that region on our group. Okay? If I was traveling alone, I would be much quieter. I'd be putting off a lot less scent. I could slip, Unbeknownst to my enemies, much easier. But there's 3 of us, and so we're going to roll a d6. It's a custom d6. Okay, we use it all the time. We use it all the time in our game system. It's the sides are numbered -3, -2, -1, +1, +2, +3. So there is no zero value. There is no unmodified value on this die. It's either -3, 2, 1, or plus 1, 2, 3. So we're going to roll that die, and because there's 3 of us, we have a 50% chance of increasing the threat of that region on us, or that we're elevating it by our presence, right? So we roll it, and let's say we roll a okay, um, let's say we roll a -2. Okay, that indicates that we've increased the threat, and so we have to do something with this threat die. Okay, we have to resolve it. One way to do it is, and anybody can roll the die. It doesn't matter who it is. Anybody can place this die, but it's because we rolled a minus number, that's a negative outcome. We've increased the threat. So let's say you roll it, you roll a -2, it is threat. Okay. And I decide to place it. I can either place it on one of those face down cards we drew, or I can place it on the tabletop. If I place it on one of the face down cards, if that card happens to be an enemy when it's revealed, instead of an enemy, it's 2 enemies. Or if we choose as a group to place the die on the tabletop, not on one of those cards, then any and all enemies that are revealed as we turn those 3 cards over will all exhibit what are called behaviors. Uh, Behaviors makes an enemy much more challenging. And if you're used to fighting a certain enemy type and it doesn't have a behavior, and then you fight it again with the behavior, the enemy's going to act completely differently. So those are our choices for going into this battle. Okay, so let's just say, what do you decide, Brandon? What do you want to do? Do you want to put it? Do you want to put the die on one of those cards or on the table?
I think we should put it on the table.
Okay, there it is. It's on the table. Okay, you reveal your card first. Okay, and it's an enemy, and because we're in the plains, it's a thunderhorn. Okay, a thunderhorn is the 6-legged horned beast that looks a bit like a cross between a bull and a buffalo kind of thing. Um, and we know that because we put the threat die over on the tabletop, that thunderhorn also has a behavior. Okay, so that's it for you. Okay, Kristen. Uh, okay, because you revealed an enemy. Once an enemy card is revealed, the order in which the cards are revealed is not as important. Okay, if you had drawn an item card, for example, okay, that would have meant that you could have put that item in your inventory right then, or if it was something you could equip, you could have equipped it then. Okay, let's play that out just for what if. Okay, so you've got the item card. Let's say I turn over the next card and it is safe travel. Okay, so we're basically what that is it's kind of saying, okay, we're going into the region, and it's not a small area of land. It's like a county, right? The first thing we found was what? We found your item that you've located, and we wandered on further. And then I drew a card, and it was safe travel. So we continue to go into this region deeper and deeper, and it's safe. And there's some flavor text on there that tells us. And then Kristen reveals her card, and it's an enemy. So you can see that order is kind of, it's almost like a little bit of a travel mechanism as to where the battle occurred. But whenever, like we just did, where you drew the enemy first, what that does is it says, okay, all bets are off. This is where the battle occurs. Let's see how big this battle is at hand. So everybody, as soon as an enemy's flipped, all the cards are revealed.
Gotcha.
So we
Okay, so it's like basically you move, or collect items and do other stuff in the game until an enemy is revealed, in
Yep.
which case things stop, all the other cards are revealed, and then a battle commences.
Bingo.
All right, cool. I
So
just wanted to make sure I was following all that because
y-
there's quite a bit there, but of course, once it's on the table, it'll be quite a bit easier to follow along with.
yeah, and I'll tell you a time when it's really important is we talk about the idea that you're moving into a region. If you think about it this way, that the first card's an enemy, that's kind of the rules, assuming that the battle happened pretty quickly after you came into the region. If you go along and find items and have flavor text and stuff, it's kind of you getting closer and closer to being able to traverse that region without incident, without battle. And then once the battle commences, we've got the enemy putting off smells, we've got noise from combat. So that's why we flip all the cards. That's why the battle that happens commences as soon as the first enemy appears. Then all we're really doing is we're resolving how bad this battle is going to be, right? So let's say we've got the Thunderhorn and we put him in his enemy dashboard. So we have a little teeny dashboard. It's super simple. It's just a little bitty rectangle that holds the enemy card, and then there's a little bitty slot in front of it that's smaller, and we draw a card from the enemy behaviors deck, and we drop it in front. And let's say it's a crusher. Okay, well, what this behavior is it says that anytime this Thunderhorn has a successful attack on us, it will cause us, and I'm not saying this is the exact wording on the card, I'm saying, but this is the idea. Let's say it knocks us down, for one, and we have to randomly discard an inventory item because it destroyed it when it hit us.
Okay.
And so that is an added danger to this thing hitting us, is that we're going to start losing items because it's breaking them.
So one thing I want to make sure I understand before we go on, because that makes sense so far. I understand that that pulls up from the enemy behavior deck when a threat level is above a certain point. But like, so when you have threats of a certain level, like what is the sequence in which things happen to make things more complicated? Is it like threat level of this, you get an extra enemy, threat level of this, you start adding enemy behaviors? I want to make sure I understand this
Okay.
point.
Yeah. So if I'm playing the game solo, okay, and I'm playing on normal difficulty, now keep in mind the game system is designed to be scalable, and it's also got difficulty levels that you get to decide. You know, if you want to play the game more of it as a story, and you want it to be more manageable, the combat to be more manageable and not as deadly, then you can play the story mode, and that will eliminate certain things from the game, like behaviors. Okay, but the normal mode of play, that threat die we talked about, if you're playing a solo player, by yourself, you roll that threat die, and the only time it would ever cause threat is if it was a -3. So a 1 in 6 chance. If there's 2 of us, it's a -2 or -3. If there's 3 of us, it's any minus roll, so a 50%. Once you get to 4 heroes, you have to roll 2 die. And so for them, they want to avoid a -3 or -2 on 2 die. If it's 5 of them, they want to avoid negative rolls completely. And if there's a full complement of 6 heroes playing the game, a +1 to -3, in other words, a 2/3 chance, each of those die will be creating threat. How you resolve any dice that's rolled, a die that's rolled, sorry, that is threat. In other words, if you roll it and it says yes, you've increased threat, you can resolve it in 2 ways. You can resolve it by placing it on one of the face down cards when you enter a region. Okay, if you place it on one of those face down cards and an enemy is revealed, it doesn't change the order in which the cards are drawn. But when that card is revealed, if it's an enemy, it's doubled in quantity.
Mm-hmm.
If you place the cube on the tabletop, then those cards that are revealed, any and all of them, any and all of them are going to have behaviors. Okay? Let's say we reveal 2 Thunderhorns as enemies. Okay? Let's say it's 2 of them. They're both going to exhibit the same behavior. But if we reveal a Thunderhorn and a Niveus Adder, each of those will go into their own enemy dashboard, and each of those will get a unique behavior. One of them
Okay,
might
okay, okay.
one of them might be a crusher, one of them might be a parasite, where every time it hits you, it gains a life. So it's like healing from the damage it's doing to you.
That makes sense.
And
Okay,
so the behavior will be the same for all enemies revealed of the same type.
got it.
Does that help?
It does help. And
Okay.
so at this point, we actually, because we're running close on time, I think we should actually take a break here. And then in the next episode, which of course for the listeners will drop in 2 weeks from the release of this one, I think we just talk through an entire battle as an example. What do you think?
Wow, we can try it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's worth a shot. So at this point, why don't you go ahead and take us out?
Thank you for listening to the Vrahode Tavern podcast. If you enjoyed this show, take a moment to subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. It helps more than you know. You can learn more about Vrahode on vrahode.com. That's VRAHODE.com. Link in the show notes. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we're at Vrahode. Thank you again for listening. We really appreciate it. Keep an eye out for our next episode in 2 weeks.